What are you all dressed up for?
Podcast.
Oh, okay.
I'm wearing Carhartts with animal manure on them underneath.
This is episode 28, and today we were talking about if you should buy an annuity. What impact, if any, do geopolitical skirmishes have on the stock market? And a couple of lightning round questions at the end. Investors trying to determine if an annuity is right for them are often bombarded by mixed messaging. Some sources will tell them that annuities are products sold by untrustworthy financial salespeople and to steer clear at all costs, while others will tout their safety and reliability of income. Drew, what do you think?
It's true that annuities are kind of polarizing in the financial services industry. Usually people are very much for them or very much against them. I'm going to try to take a middle ground and just talk about them as another financial planning tool, a tool that has its particular job in the world. I wouldn't try to cut down a tree with a screwdriver, nor would I try to paint a house with a chainsaw. So in the financial world, there's situations where it may be useful to break out an annuity, but it's not the Swiss Army knife of tools. Now, unfortunately, annuities are treated as a multi-tool. I like to think of annuities as more like a spud wrench, and it comes in handy in very specific situations. There are some good things about annuities. One, you can't outlive your income stream. With annuities, you have guaranteed income as long as you live, assuming that the insurance company is still in business. Two, they absorb some of the risks of investing on your own in the open market. When the markets are going up, or they're going down, or they're going sideways, the annuity's growth and rate of return are fixed, granting that it's a fixed annuity and not a variable annuity. Three, they grow tax deferred. Just like other retirement accounts, you don't pay taxes on the money while it's in the account growing. Now, all of these wonderful things obviously come at a cost. One, liquidity, or annuities have liquidity issues. Getting out of an annuity can be very hard and it can be very expensive, almost to the point where you might take out less than you originally put in. Two, they have extremely high fees, commissions, surrender charges, and tax penalties. Annuities are really complicated contracts, and if you don't do your due diligence, you may not be informed of all the costs associated with getting into one. And three, they limit the growth potential of your investment. Annuities can be pitched in such a way to make a bad deal sound like a good deal. It's kind of like when you go to the doctor's office and you're going in for an operation, and they say, Drew, you have a 95% chance of living, or Drew, you have a 5% chance of dying. Which one sounds better and which one sounds worse? It's kind of like how annuities can be pitched. For example, annuities can offer things called riders, which are basically just extra features that you pay for on the contract. So for an example, let's take an investment in an annuity of $100,000 that guarantees to pay 7% annually for 10 years, and then it guarantees 5% annually for the rest of your life. Well, that sounds pretty good. It's all guaranteed, but if you crunch the numbers, if you start this contract when you're 65, you're going to be 95 before you've actually made your original investment back. Odds are you'd have been better off just investing on your own. So just to reiterate, they're a very specific tool that I might recommend in the right circumstances, but do your due diligence, do your homework, and maybe seek the advice of a fee-only investment advisor.
Alex, what do you think?
Well, I think Drew probably said just about everything you could possibly say about him, so I'll just keep it pretty straightforward. It really just depends on what your goal is. Right now, a 10-year treasury pays around 1.9%. The national average for municipals is around 1.5% for a 10-year bond. But according to annuity.org, you can get around 3% by buying a 10-year annuity right now. So if you're looking for, fixed income over the next decade or so, and you want to beat treasuries, you want to beat municipal bonds, an annuity might be worth looking at. If you're trying to keep pace with inflation, though, CPI right now is 7%. I don't think we've seen the numbers for January yet, so it may be even higher. Who knows how long this inflation that was supposed to be transitory, that's now turning into more of a long-term thing will last. If you're hoping to keep pace with inflation, an annuity is just not going to cut it. But like I said, if you're just looking for some fixed income for over the next decade for some cash flow or whatever, better than treasuries, better than municipals. Talk to an advisor, see what might work for you.
Joe, what do you think?
I think that investors need to understand that annuities are insurance products first and investment products second. But the commissions and fees on annuities in most cases can be excessively high. And so there's a perverse incentive for insurance agents to sell them. But with that said, I think that like all insurance products, annuities are like bikinis. They work extremely well when they fit, and they can be a complete disaster when they don't. Now, the issue is that most people are sold annuities. They don't actually buy annuities. And the reason they're sold them is because they can be extremely high commission products for the agent who sells them. In our office, we occasionally recommend people buy annuities, but we do no-load annuities, so they don't have those commissions, and the fees tend to be quite low and quite a cut rate. There are lots of good reasons for people to buy an annuity. I'm not sure everybody needs one, and we don't recommend or advise on many of them. But when we do, it's because it's the best fit for the customer. For example, if somebody's concerned about long-term care costs at some point in the future, you can put money into an annuity, it'll grow tax deferred, and then you can pull the money out, and the offsetting cost of you being in the nursing home will, you get the deduction, which will offset the income tax liability of taking the money out. And in our office, we've observed probably a half a dozen times in the last 2 years where people have done just that, and it worked out extremely well, just like we had planned 20 years ago when we put them in it. There's a lot of folks out there. It's very, very easy to say something like annuity's bad, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. Annuities are bad if they don't work well for the individual, but they can be extremely good products when they do.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is that, you guys have already said it, and I won't take up too much more time on it, but yeah, they're not good or bad. It's just a tool in the box. Ken Fisher and some other people have come out and they've, written books and lots of articles on how bad that they are. But the industry, I will say, has evolved a lot, and they do have some really low cost annuities that you can put your money into, and you still get a pretty decent return on, as well as some tax deferral. But it's just another tool in the box, and they're not good or bad. It just depends on your situation and what you want.
It's also depends on where we are in history. When I first came in the industry, the tax code, the tax rates were significantly higher than they are now. And the average middle-class person had a higher marginal tax bracket than they do today. And the capital gains tax was much higher than it is today. So if there's any tweaks to the tax code, you can almost bet that annuities may become more attractive. Higher taxes on the middle class, and the better the deal an annuity is. The lower the tax bracket on the middle class, and the worse of a deal an annuity is.
They do offer that tax deferred growth. So if there's ever a change in investment vehicles out there where you do have tax deferred growth, they might shine. We have seen instances where people put annuities within a tax deferred vehicle, and that's just like wearing a belt with suspenders. There's absolutely no reason why you should have an annuity in your 401k.
Yeah.
Well, for some married folks though, they having an annuity inside of an IRA. The IRA is the largest collection of wealth that the individual has, and you may have one spouse who's really aggressive as an investor, and another spouse who's incredibly conservative or not that sophisticated. What an annuity with a death benefit can do inside of a qualified plan is provide that guarantee that even if my spouse gambles and loses everything on paper in the annuity, well, if he croaks before I do, I get all that money back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and essentially you're making your own pension. I mean, is that right now, is that if you have just a 401k, you can basically take all the money out. And then if you wanted to, I mean, you have the option of blowing it. But if it's locked up inside an annuity where they give you payments on a periodic basis, you can't do that. So, but again, that's just one of those things where it's dependent on the person. And you're right. Yeah, if capital gains taxes go way up, then annuities might start looking more attractive for tax deferral reasons. A potential conflict between Russia and Ukraine has been brewing for a while, and the Wall Street Journal has cited this potential conflict as a reason for market volatility. However, what kind of impact do you think small regional conflicts like this have on the stock market, and do you think it's a reason for concern?
Well, in this particular case, like with Ukraine, it may be a little bit less of an impact than other possible skirmishes. But let's just take a look at Ukraine. What we're really talking about is, when you boil it down, it's an ethnic and border conflict between two former Soviet republics. And the main thing, there's two main things that are going to be disrupted if shooting starts between these two countries. Number one is going to be Russian energy, and number two is going to be Ukrainian wheat. Middle East and North Africa is pretty heavily dependent on a lot of wheat from the Black Sea region. And a lot of that comes from the Ukraine. They are a breadbasket country. So if all of a sudden all those wheat fields are on fire, or they're, full of craters from artillery shells or whatever, that's going to have a big impact on everybody else basically around the entire planet who grows wheat. Because it's not like people in the Middle East and North Africa can just stop eating until the shooting also stops. Same thing with energy. If Russian energy stops flowing into Europe, they're going to have to get it from somewhere, and they do a lot of natural gas these days, and that means they're probably shipping it from North America. That makes natural gas more expensive here at home and in North America, because there will be more buyers for it. If the Russian gas isn't going to Germany, for example, they've got to take it from a place like the Sabine Pass LNG facility in Texas in a specialized tanker, drop it off in northern France or Belgium or wherever, and then put it into the European pipeline system from there. That's not cheap. It's definitely more expensive than just getting it from the old Soviet pipeline network out of Russia, which is what Russia still uses to this day. But if we look at a different geopolitical skirmish, one that might have more far-ranging implications, would be China and Taiwan. So if a naval conflict breaks out in the South China Sea, that disrupts 33% of all maritime trade. This is more than just, television sets or iPhones. It's, the plastic cases that you put the laptops in, or food, that's oil, that's energy. Basically all the energy that goes to East Asia passes through this area. Now, you can take ships around these areas, but that takes time. That means more money. Many of the big problems with this is that we now are, for better or worse, in a globalized supply chain environment. There's 100 and something stops to make an iPhone, and if 2 or 3 of those stops are not available, you don't have an iPhone. So when a company like Apple, for example, or a TV assembly plant in the United States wants, let's look at the TV assembly plant. If they can't get the plastic cases from Vietnam and the electronic panels from Taiwan, they don't have a TV to assemble. All those people lose their jobs. They stop spending money. They're not buying things. All kinds of companies lose money when even a handful of stops in the supply chain for even a few products get disrupted. Like I said, for better or worse, because we've decided to, hold hands with everybody around the world on purpose to save a few bucks at checkout. Now, anytime we see, 2 little dictators try and fight each other halfway around the world, we all have to suffer, unfortunately.
I'll take a more 30-foot approach to this. If there's one thing that markets dislike, it's uncertainty. In fact, they dislike uncertainty more than they do bad news. History has shown that stocks actually suffer most during pre-war periods where anticipation of these geopolitical skirmishes are high, rather than during the actual war itself. Typically, once the conflict breaks out, markets tend to regroup, they adjust, and they carry on. The one exception to this is when war tends to break out unexpectedly. Stocks usually nosedive and then recover as the war later develops. This particular case between Russia and the Ukraine, I don't think it's a reason for concern. I wouldn't sell everything as a knee-jerk reaction, but I think it's good to pay attention on how it might develop and how it might impact certain investments or certain commodities or multinational firms, and adjust your investment strategy accordingly.
Drew took almost all of my thunder with his comments, because that was my perspective as well, is that markets loathe uncertainty. You have more uncertainty with war and you have less uncertainty with peace. Because when you have a war situation, you start doing these what if scenarios in your head. And Alex alluded to it. It might not just be the markets are concerned about what's happening between Russia and Ukraine. They're also concerned about what's happening with Taiwan and China and how that's going to have an impact. So all these smart people on Wall Street using their computer modeling are trying to do these what if scenarios, and what they're finding is uncertainty, which causes all kinds of panic, and then they don't know what to do. The individual investor, you just follow the rules. In fact, the rules help us and guide us at times where we don't have 20/20 vision, particularly into the future. So for investors who are concerned about what's happening in Russia or Ukraine, then just follow our Wealth Masters milestones. If you're going to own investments, make sure you buy high quality investments and they're appropriate for you, and be real smart with your income. But ultimately, Drew is absolutely correct. Markets loathe uncertainty, and as long as we know what the future holds, markets will get through.
Well, I wanted to jump back in with the uncertainty thing. Absolutely, markets hate uncertainty, and that's exactly why I think people should be paying attention to conflicts like the South China Sea or Eastern Europe. And sorry if I went on a little too long earlier, but anybody who's read some of the newsletter articles, we've been going over some of these things over the last few months. But increasingly, the United States appears to be backing away from the last 80 years of policy, which was anybody steps out of line and we smack them over the head with a really big stick. And if that doesn't work, we just replace them. And with the United States no longer really seeming all that interested in getting involved in these kind of conflicts anymore, especially after, the way Iraq kind of went for a while and the way Afghanistan ended, I would expect more and more that countries will be engaging in these kind of things. In other words, history is going to restart. We've been living in a really long period of kind of unprecedented peace and prosperity. There's only been a handful of times in history where there's been one or two superpowers that have been able to be so powerful that anybody else steps out of line, they just crush them. While we may, or we could debate whether or not the United States still could or couldn't, crush anybody. Increasingly, we don't seem that interested in doing it anymore. And so you're going to start seeing more and more conflicts like, China deciding, I think Taiwan really needs to become a part of China for real now. Or, I think all the Russian speaking regions in Eastern Europe need to be ruled by Moscow again, that kind of stuff. So I would not bet that these are one-off events. I would bet that this is the beginning of the new normal, not an aberration. And I think investors should start paying attention to increasingly these kinds of things.
I think the fact is that you're right. China and Taiwan is a bigger deal. The what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, as long as it remains like isolated between Russia and Ukraine, the markets are very pragmatic. It's like you're right. They don't like uncertainty, but they're also really pragmatic. And if Russia does invade Ukraine and it stops there, Ukraine's GDP only makes up about $151 billion relative to the global economy, which is $84.6 trillion. So it's virtually nothing. And it's not going to affect commerce. It's not going to affect shipping. we don't get a lot of goods and services out of Ukraine. There's nothing we really need from Ukraine. So the market as a whole is, it might react a little bit to the fact that we're sending troops over there, whatever. But ultimately is that on a very pragmatic level, the market's going to know that this isn't going to have a huge economic impact. It's a bigger impact with China and Ukraine, because that could have potential for a bigger conflict. But I think, Alex, you touched on something where we've had like kind of unprecedented, peace and prosperity for a long time. And as nations become more developed, their willingness to, have their cities potentially, bombed or fight some sort of war that's going to set them back decades, I guess what I'm trying to say is that they have a lot of incentive to not go to war, so they don't have to rebuild all their infrastructure. They don't have to go through, the decades of growth they finally, or they had to go through to get to this point. So, yes, nobody likes uncertainty, and I think, between Russia and Ukraine, I don't think there is a lot of uncertainty as long as it stays isolated in that region. If it starts growing, kind of like a World War II thing, obviously, market's going to go down a little bit. But I will point out is that 3 years before the war ended, the U.S. stock market started increasing from its lows. And the other point that I'll make is that with these kind of things, that the market is always pricing in future events. So right now, you probably have Russia, Ukraine already priced into the market. And then as soon as we get some sort of resolution or something else happens, you're going to get another move in the market based on what's going on. So, the markets are extremely forward-looking, and a lot of times we're just waiting to see what happens between Russia and Ukraine. And there's a lot of people playing game theory with their accounts right now. If Russia does, invade Ukraine, what's going to happen? They're going to try and figure that out and position their portfolios accordingly. But right now, as long as it stays just between Russia and Ukraine, the markets are pretty pragmatic and they aren't going to move too much on. If it expends, if Russia moving in Ukraine, U.S. doesn't do anything about it, and that incentivizes the Chinese to invade Taiwan, then you're probably going to have some bigger issues. But just between Russia and Ukraine, it's not going to be a huge deal. And historically, it hasn't been either. Anytime Russia, Iran, or North Korea has started some sort of geopolitical skirmish, almost the market has almost not reacted. And if it has, it comes back, fairly soon after. All right, we'll move on to the lightning round of our show. On February 2nd, UPS reported blowout earnings, record revenue, and a 49% dividend increase. Does this make UPS an attractive stock, or would you rather own FedEx? Drew, what do you think?
I haven't done too much research on this. I've always been a fan of FedEx. It's great that UPS had good earnings, but I guess I'm just biased. They've had good revenue in the past. I think they trade at 0.7 times their trailing revenues compared to a UPS, which is 1.9. So I'm still a fan of FedEx. I'm long on FedEx.
Alex?
I would pick FedEx at this point. Just doing a quick bit of research, UPS is still trading about $40 over its fair value. FedEx is actually slightly below fair value. The dividend is nice. UPS has a better one, but I would be more afraid of UPS losing $40 a share than FedEx losing any money at this point.
Go.
I'm kind of biased. For the record, I'm long in FedEx, and I've done extremely well in it. And I bought it at a much deeper discount than it is now. But if I had a choice between the two of them, and I was only allowed to pick one, I'd probably pick FedEx.
Yeah, I have the same feeling. FedEx is more of the value play right now. It doesn't have much of a dividend, but UPS doesn't have that much of a dividend right now either. I wouldn't say better dividend stocks, but there's other stocks that are just as good financially paying higher dividends. If I had to pick one, it'd be FedEx. I did buy FedEx a long time ago. It is in my portfolio, so I do hold it. But if I wanted more transportation stuff, or if I didn't know, you'd be fine just holding UPS, FedEx, and Amazon, and then you don't have to worry about one eating the other. So, for the record, I'd pick FedEx. After 22 seasons, Tom Brady has announced his retirement from the NFL. Do you think Tom Brady is retiring too early, or do you think he should have retired years ago? We'll start with Alex on this one. Alex, what do you think?
Just from a fan's standpoint, he retired too soon. He still, I think, led the NFL in passing yards and touchdowns, MVP finalist. They were the defending champions. They lost in the playoffs. It looks like they were going to be able to make at least another couple years worth of attempts at winning yet another Super Bowl. So it looked like he could still go with the best of them, but decided to go spend time with the family. Hard to argue, but from a fan standpoint, too soon.
Drew?
I think Tom Brady's kind of like Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. Whatever he does, he's never early, he's never late. He's exactly on time for what he wants to do. So if he wants to retire now, good on him.
Joe?
Being the oldest guy on the podcast, I'd have to say that anybody who's been playing football for as many years as Tom Brady has, when he decides to retire, is a good time to retire. When you play professional football, after every game, you are just you're in pain. And at some point, you have more money than you have health. And you say, you know what, at this point, what little health I have left, I'm just going to take my chips off the table and quit it. And he's certainly put on a high note, so I don't see how he's going to lose with his decision.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly could have retired a couple of years ago, especially like right after winning a Super Bowl or something like that. The thing is, he's 44. He's a freak of nature. There was not many people can be a 44-year-old being a quarterback in the NFL. So, I mean, he's one of those people where he probably could keep going, but you don't want him to turn into like somewhat like an Albert Pujols. Even though he's like baseball, you can last a lot longer in baseball, but you're past your prime. You're kind of like the 45-year-old showing up at a high school party, and people are like, "Oh, you're still here, huh?" So I don't know, but he probably he probably definitely could have retired sooner, but I'm glad he retired now before he just has like a really terrible season and then has to call it in, because of health reasons or something like that. Unbeknownst to me, the Winter Olympics started yesterday fairly quietly, and I know we recently talked about the Summer Olympics this summer, and they all got squished together because of the pandemic, but Alex, are you going to watch the Winter Olympics, and if so, what sports are you going to watch?
I'll probably watch some of it. If I'm going to watch anything, it'll probably be like the hockey, the curling, and if I'm just bored and looking for something to do, whatever's on.
Drew?
I'm going to watch curling. I like watching curling. It's a fascinating sport to watch.
Joe?
Absolutely not. First of all, you have to have network television. You have to pay somebody to watch it. I'm certainly not going to do that. Secondly, is that I don't want to watch a bunch of commercials for companies that proselytize to me about all of their human rights issues here in the United States, and yet are going to turn a blind eye to Chinese human rights abuses overseas to turn a buck. But with all that said, if some neat events show up on YouTube and you guys tell me about it, I'll probably watch them on YouTube after the fact.
Yeah, so I didn't actually know the Olympics started until I got home last night, and my kids were watching figure skating on Hulu. That's not really my event. Like you guys, curling is definitely my event, mostly because the fact is that if I want to have a midlife crisis in 10 years, I could probably still be an Olympic curler. There's no way I could do figure skating. I can't do hockey, and so I mean, we all four of us could probably get together and go down to the local ice rink, practice real hard for like 7 years, and then maybe make the next Olympics. So I like to watch sports where there's still potential I can show up in a couple of years.
They really can be the most unathletic world-class athlete. Like if you take a walk down Muscle Beach, you don't go, oh, those must be a bunch of curlers over there.
Right. Yeah.
Well, how much effort could it possibly take to lay down on a sled and go downhill with it? That's an Olympic sport.
I mean, but you gotta get that thing started. I mean, you gotta get that thing moving.
Gravity will take care of
most of it. People that put on those bobsled teams are beasts, because it's the 3 seconds before they hop on the thing that matters.
Yeah, and you have to pretty good reflex. I mean, you still have to steer the sled in a lot of cases, you know, and you're going pretty fast. And any mistake, you know, I don't know if anybody saw the movie Cool Runnings, but you don't want to make a mistake on the bobsled.
I've heard it takes an incredible amount of core strength as well, because you're taking those corners at like a few G's. If you don't have the muscles to stabilize yourself and keep control of your sled, you're not going to make it.
That said, if I was on a bobsled team, I would want to be the guy in the middle, because really all you have to do is push, and then you're just going to ride the rest of the way.
Just sit there.
You know, the guy in the back has to brake the sled, so, you know, or has to stop it. So if you screw that up, that's bad.
And I can't tell if the brake woman is
The driver, obviously, if you make a mistake, that's bad. But the two guys in the middle, you're basically just getting a free ride after you push start the sled.
I think they make up a bunch of the weight, because they're all leaning. It's all they're all working as a team, shifting at different points of the curve.
Right.
So they're not just doing nothing. But
yeah, but it's like one of those things. If you make a mistake, it's hard to be like, hey, you didn't lean hard enough. Whereas if you miss a turn, it's like obviously it's the driver's fault.
But I will pay $1,000 to any one of our viewers who can persuade Tom to wear a sequined figure skating outfit and get on the ice.
The skating isn't the thing. Yeah, exactly.
Wait,
the sequined outfit would be more the issue. The skating, I could probably do it. You know, I played hockey for like 20 years, so I could get in some stuff in there, but fitting into the outfit might be an issue.
Tom, if you do it, I'll split it with you.
Yeah, no thanks.
$500.
Yeah, all right. Maybe we'll get some shots of that. All right. All right, well, that is it for episode 28 of Farm to Markets. We'll see you next week.